On today's episode of Locked On Lightning, we talk more about Erik Cernak. How long does the Stanley Cup window stay open for the Lightning, as well as a trade between the Leafs and the Bolts? All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Tanker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Just a reminder, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So on today's episode, we're talking more about Erik Cernak. Kind of following up yesterday's episode, brought up a lot of opinions about Erik Cernak. We'd also talk about the Stanley Cup window for the Tampa Bay Lightning. How long does it stay open? As well as we wrap things up with a interesting trade scenario, maybe rumor, whatever you want to call it. We talk about that between the Lightning and the Leafs. But before we grab any of those topics, I want to please humbly ask you to, if you haven't already done so, download and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so subscribe to our channel there. And if you want to follow the show, we are available on Twitter and Instagram, LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. So yesterday, I put forth my, if you haven't watched it, it was probably one of the most fun episodes I've done probably in a very long time. But yesterday, since there has been so much talk amongst all of you about, possible trades or the way you want the Lightning to go through this summer's offseason, I decided to, put on my GM hat and talk and really just go about making the team better. And I thought what I did was pretty good. I mean, there were some spots. I'm not giving too much away. If you haven't listened to it or watched the episode, go ahead. It's really, like I said, I had a fun time. A lot of you, like I also said, reacted to it on our YouTube channel. But it involved the Stamkos re-signing, Chafee coming back, and the Lightning going after some upcoming UFAs, who I think not only could help this team, but are also players that could very well help the Lightning and are very realistic acquisitions for the Lightning. The only thing that kind of was probably, if you want to throw, I think I gave Stamkos 5.5 for 5 years. If you want to bump that up to 6, go ahead, or even $1 million more, be my guest. I left $1 million of cap space for the Lightning, so if you want to bump that up, go ahead. I have no problem with that either. But what I stated in the episode about that really drew a lot of reaction from all of you, which I'm happy it did, because that was something that really, I think, provoked a lot of thought when talking about some of the moves or the plans that we would want to have the Lightning have for next season. Is the really Erik Cernak. We all know, and it is very well, it has very much been discussed on this show, his performance over the past year and how really his contract kind of, if the Lightning were trying to move on from him, that's going to be really a big time roadblock. That really is going to be something that I would be surprised if the Lightning could get past. I even spoke about it. I said, the only reason I didn't make a deal for Cernak, because it's just, unfortunately, he hasn't played up to his contract. A lot of you said that it's ridiculous, that he's still very young. And yes, he's very young. He's on the verge of turning 27. We forget that he's been in the league for a billion years. Well, really 6, but it just seems like he's been in the league way longer than that. But my thing about it, and you all listen, I applaud all of you that, came to his defense. But let's face it, what we have seen from him over the last couple of years has really been kind of disappointing. We kind of all thought that when Ryan McDonough was traded, that he was ready to slide into his position of really being the defensive wall that the Lightning were so lucky to have in Ryan McDonough all those years he was in Tampa Bay. That hasn't really been the case, and I'm sorry, that hasn't been the case. And on the other side of that, well, really not on the other side of that, but really what goes hand in hand with all of that is that his inability to stay healthy. I mean, you look at his career numbers, and if you want to glance past 21-22, just because that was a shortened year, be my guess, he did play all but one game that year in the shortened season. He has never played past 70 games. And I know he plays a very aggressive, he takes a beating out there. I get that. I get it. I totally get it. But for a guy who is really supposed to be the heart and soul of your team defensively, the guy's got to play more games than that. We got to see him for at least 78, a little on the tail end, on the back end of 75. You know, we can't. That's part of the reason, the Lightning, it was very well documented. They had their defensive issues this year, 100%. Totally get it. At the same time, Cernak played 69 games this year. I'm sorry, that's unacceptable. And whether it's I'm not saying that he's soft or anything like that. So don't come at me in the comments on YouTube or on social media and say that I said that when that's not the case. Listen, the guy is as gritty as they come on this team, but he needs, whether you got to find that balance, and we all know he is not really savvy at all offensively. His career high is 5 goals in a season, 18 points. So I look at it more as, if you're going to pay this guy $5.5 million and you're in the situation defensively right now as the Lightning are, the guy's got to play more games. He can't just be missing chunks of time. It's a little different when you're missing forwards. You can kind of play around that. Defensively, it's hard. Especially when Hedman's been disappointing. Radish, coming into this year, was still figuring it out. And even going into next year, we could talk about it. Lilleberg. Lilleberg showed me a lot this year. He could be a possible part of the core going forward. Like we have seen in Hagel in the last couple of years. He has played himself into the core of this Lightning team. Lilleberg could be the same thing. But Cernak, when you are part of the core of this team, and he is 100% is, and you're only playing 69, 70 games, that's a problem. I'm sorry, that's a problem. You got to find ways to stay on the ice. And like I said, I'm not saying he's a soft player. We all know it's the complete opposite. But whether it's changing your training plan or whatever, it's something that needs to be addressed. And I'm sure it's something that, to a certain extent, might be in the back of his mind. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and speculate what is going through Erik Cernak's mind at this point in time. But in that same breath, really the thing that mystified me in the comments was, and I know someone pointed out, thank you to whoever it was, I don't remember who it was exactly, but you said that Cernak's no trade clause goes into effect starting in July 1st. I mean, hypothetically speaking, if the Lightning sit down with Cernak and say, listen, you're not a part of our plans for the future anymore, I'm sure that'll hurt at first, but it's better now to get that out of the way than have to just play in an environment where you know that the team that you're playing for maybe is looking in another direction. And I'm sure Cernak at this point in time, him being as experienced in the NHL for as long as he has, would be smart enough to know. And I'm not saying let's trade him, but I don't know why it's such a blasphemous thing to talk about it when really the end goal for this Tampa Bay Lightning team is really to make everything better. That's the unfortunate part of sports. And, we see it in jobs too, in the professional world, outside of sports. For example, you're a business owner, you want to make your company better and be able to grow and more productive and all that. And, you have one employee that maybe is not working out for you. You got to look in a different direction. And the same goes for sports. There are players on this team, 100%, that are off limits. But I don't believe that Erik Cernak is that guy. I don't think he's off limits. I don't care how recent of a contract extension he has got. Yes, that long-term contract, $5.2 million a year, that's going to be like I said, most likely the Lightning, if they were to trade Cernak, that would have to be something to where they would have to retain some of that money 100%. There is no way that any team, unless they are absolutely desperate, are going to take the full monetary value of that contract. I would be shocked. And even if they are desperate, I still don't think that would happen. But to sit here and say that he is above getting traded, those are the people that, and maybe I'm wrong, but from my point of view, someone who has been here since 2020 talking to you about the Tampa Bay Lightning and has seen this team gradually grow and change over time. There's no easy decisions in hockey. We've seen that. We've seen about with all the players that have left Tampa Bay, whether willingly or unwillingly. And really what it comes down to is that, are you really going to sit here and be sentimental about those 2 cup wins? Because yes, Cernak was a vital part of that. And like someone else pointed out, which if you're listening to this, thank you, and you know who you are. And I 100% agree with this statement. Why is it so outrageous to maybe possibly start coming to terms with the fact that maybe Cernak, his good performance back then, was a product of playing alongside Ryan McDonough? Think about that. We'll talk about it because I'm sure a lot of you will definitely react to that. But at the same time, I mean, I agree with some of you others said. You put him along a guy who's solid on the other side. Let's see how he plays, and if he's still not playing well, then maybe yes, we could start really looking at other options. And I agree with that too. I'm not saying we got to trade him right away, but if the deal is there to where you could free up some cap and get better players and continue to grow over time, then why would you reject that? So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about how long is the cup, or how long will the cup window stay open for this Tampa Bay Lightning team. With all the changes that have happened over the years and the issues with the cap and all of that, it's one of those things where, you really start to wonder, 2 straight years out in the first round. Are we starting to see the beginning of the end for this Tampa Bay Lightning core? We'll talk about that coming up in just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about our first sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices and views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. My favorite part, or one of my favorite parts of it, I mean, there's tons of things to love about Game Time, is last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. I love the all-in pricing. It allows me to see what I'm paying for all up front instead of those last-minute fees that you always get at checkout at the other sites. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. As always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast on our YouTube channel. We're also available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. If you want to reach out to me, go ahead on Twitter at DankyDank, DenkyDank. I'll be coming to you all summer long until training camp starts and the regular season starts, where we'll be talking about Lightning hockey. This summer, you definitely want to join us on the podcast because we'll be looking back on the 2004 Stanley Cup run, as it is now 20 years since that first cup came to Tampa Bay. So we're doing a complete watch through of the entire playoff run. You definitely don't want to miss it. So we just got done talking about Erik Cernak, and my big point of emphasis on whenever the Lightning make a move is two things. One, is this going to make the team better right now? 1A, if it's not going to make the team better right now, is it going to make the team better in the future? And I also look at it with signings. Is this going to benefit the team now? Are we locking up this player for a reasonable price that is going to keep them in Tampa Bay and allow them to play happy and be happy and, all that fun stuff when it comes to signing a new contract or an extension? And does it make the team better? And then also, how is this going to affect the team next year and the year after and the year after that? And I think it's very reasonable to discuss at this point in time. When you're looking at the Tampa Bay Lightning, 2 straight years out of the first round, their core is starting to get in. A lot of them are starting to get into their 30s. Cooch is 30. Stamkos is 34. Nick Paul is 29. I'm not really looking at him, but I just pointed it out since he's on the verge of turning 30. Connor Sherry's 31. I don't consider him as part of the core. Luke Glendening is 35. I couldn't believe that. I'm shocked. I don't know if that's accurate. I'm looking at Cap Friendly right now, but Victor Hedman is 33. Calvin DeHaan is 32. He's not part of the core. Vasilevsky's on the verge of 29. And Point's actually 28, so we have time with him. But really what I'm trying to drive in at is that once you hit 30 in the NHL, majority of players, I think around 31, 32, you start to see a little bit of a step back in their performance. The great ones and the players that are able to play forever, those guys, you don't really see that until a couple of years later on, like 35, if at all. And that's a reasonable thing to wonder because, we already know about Stamkos. His future is up in the air. Could he come back? Will he, there's also that third option. If he doesn't come back, will he just retire? Which is not an unreasonable thing to think about. He's made his money. He's accomplished all he's needed to accomplish. Why not just hang out with his family now? But the reason I bring it up is because, like I've said multiple times, this offseason is going to be very important for the Tampa Bay Lightning because really, you're going to have contracts that are going to be signed. long-term deals. We've seen over the last couple of years, Sorelli, Paul, Point, those guys got big deals. Hagel's got big deals. A big deal, excuse me. Sergachev got an extension. Cernak as well. Obviously, Vasilevsky's on the books till 27, 28. And it makes you wonder with all these long-term deals what this team's going to look like, honestly, in the next 3 years. Because, yes, the salary cap is going up, and that's phenomenal. That's something that is really, I think, going to benefit the Lightning. But at the same time, so is everybody else's salary cap. It's not like the Lightning are going to get an advantage over any other team. But it's really going to be an interesting time for Julien Brisebois because we haven't seen him really have a summer like this. And it makes you wonder how much longer until the cup window closes for this Lightning team. And if I had to really put a number on it, I would say unless we see awesome offseason this year, like we see another, we see consistent off seasons. We don't see Julien Brisebois get contract happy because I think as great as it was locking up Sergachev, locking up Point, obviously Point, you got to get that deal done. Sorelli, that's a good deal, but the Paul deal, yes, in a couple of years it's gonna really, it's really gonna even out. The Hagel deal as well, but I'm talking about the next 3 years, how, or even the next 2 years, how those contracts have, or in even the last couple of years, how those contracts have really hamstrung this Lightning team, and it has really forced them, along with really them trading away draft picks and the Jeannot trade as well. It's really kind of forced this organization to really run on fumes. And that's what goes in hand with, cup window, because we saw with the Red Wings all those years that they made the playoffs like 20 something straight years or something like that. The Lindstrom Red Wings, with Yzerman and as well. They were able to just replenish the team, not only from signing free agents who wanted to go there and win cups, but through the farm system, great drafting. And that's, the time to kind of start that, like we saw kind of this season, is now. I mean, yeah, Julien Brisebois isn't going to do much with 3 7th-round picks. He's got 5 picks this year. Like I said, 3 of them in the 7th round, the earliest coming at 5. And then the year after, you get one in the second as well. But really what I'm driving at is that right now, unless we see, like I said, a phenomenal offseason, the window is closing. Not really sure when it's going to close, but it is slowly shutting. And really what my hope is that we see almost a slight overhaul of the minor league system. I mean, there is a lot of hope on Isaac Howard to be the savior out of Syracuse in the minor league system. I mean, until I see him play at the NHL level, I'm not going to hang my hat on him, being the saving grace as the next top talent on this team. But really just looking at the way at how this organization looks from top to bottom right now. And like I said, you have your core players aging. I mean, they don't stay in their 20s forever. I would say we're maybe looking at a 3-year window here. And I'm not saying that is a bad thing. This isn't, the crap on Lightning party. This is more so another emphasis on how important this offseason is going to be for Julian Brees-Boss and the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think not to go back real quick, but my trades that I made yesterday on our segment or our episode about how I talked about Lightning need to do this, they need to do that. That is all based off of also keeping your trade stock intact. You know, having a cup window open doesn't necessarily mean you have to make the playoffs every year. Sometimes you're going to miss the playoffs and you could still have a cup window. It is very possible. That might sound a little outlandish to some of you, but it's a very reasonable thing to say. If the Lightning could make 2 3-year deals or 2 to 3 year deals with guys like a Sean Moynihan or an Alexander Carrier, and almost tell guys to a certain extent, come here, play for a championship, play in a very great market, great weather, make money, and we'll talk turkey in 2 to 3 years, chock it full of incentives, do all of that. And I think that's a good way to have guys come in. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, we could talk about this honestly all offseason. And I'm sure once the Lightning's roster, for the most part, is set in stone, we'll talk about that and really kind of look forward towards the NHL season as well as beyond 2024-25. So coming up in just a little bit, we're talking about an interesting article that was brought to my attention today on the hockeynews.com about a potential possible trade between the Bolts and the Maple Leafs. But first, we'll talk about our last sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at Monopoly Go. Now, if you've been listening to Locked On Lightning every day, if you're an everydayer, and I talk about Monopoly Go all the time. But there's just so much fun stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you could team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you could trade with a friend to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. So there's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Monopoly Go. Game on. So one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast on our YouTube channel. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter at DankyDank, DNKYD8NK. Pretty soon, just some breaking or some news. It's not really breaking, but starting in the next week or so, I will be featured writing. I'll start writing for Bolts by the Bay on fansided.com. They brought me on this week as one of their local experts, and I'm happy to be on there and providing really some great content for all the readers. So if you want to go ahead and read more, because a lot of the articles that I will be writing will be kind of extensions of what I talk about on here, as well as vice versa. So whatever I talk about on this podcast, I'll definitely, probably, most likely be writing more about it in detail on boltsbythebay.com. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be posting some of my articles in the next week. And so go ahead to DankyDank, DNKYD8NK, to follow along. And you could also reach out to me, and I'll talk about it here on Locked On Lightning, some of the articles I've written on there. So if you want to do it that way, go ahead. So real quick, there was a article, I believe, that was put out today, speaking of articles, on the Hockey News. It was actually put out 2 hours ago, and it talks about, there was an analyst putting out, or really talking about possibly making a trade for Mitch Marner, or something that could very well be in the cards for Tampa Bay this offseason. This was written by Michael DeRosa, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that apparently the core in Toronto, that could be something that could be broken up this summer. And it looks like Marner is kind of like on the outside looking in with that. And I don't know how to feel about that, honestly. This is coming from Kevin McGran of the Toronto Sun when he was talking about hypothetical landing spots for Marner, and the Lightning was one of them. Obviously, his deal is friendly towards them because he'll be a UFA after this year. Also, we already know, if you haven't, John Cooper is like a huge Mitch Marner fan, so that would kind of be a match made in heaven. But here's the caveat to it, or the catch, in which I would say absolutely not to this deal. The big piece that the Lightning would have to give up in this trade for Mitch Marner would be Mikhail Sergachev. So that's just where the conversation stops for me. Marner, my issue with Marner is not so much his talent. It's more so his lack of performance, especially in this most recent playoff series. When I look at the Leafs, I just look at a team. I don't know if it's coaching. I don't know if it's leadership. I don't know what it is. If you want to listen, or if you want to learn more about it, go ahead to Locked On Leafs. Those guys are great. They provide the best Maple Leaf coverage in the game out there. So if you want to learn more about that, I'm sure they've been talking about it. But my thing is, I see a team that just really, the first sign of trouble, they kind of roll over and show their belly. And so I look at it this way. I don't really want any player from that core group because, yes, he is one of the leaders on that team. If I had to pick one player from that team to be on the Lightning, it would probably be William Nylander, just because I think he's so underrated. I think he just gets lost in the conversation when we're talking about Toronto. Because of just obviously Austin Matthews, John Tavares, Mitch Marner. I think William Nylander really should be the number one gun to go to on that team, other than Austin Matthews. I think really, if you really are serious about winning a cup up there, obviously your most talented player is Austin Matthews, but I think that you need to get William Nylander more involved than he already is on that team. But yeah, I think any deal, whether it's hypothetical or not, that has Mikhail Sergachev involved. We were talking about untouchables before. I mean, he's at the top of the list. I think you look at the untouchables on this team, it's Kuch, Vazzy, Sergachev, Point. I mean, not necessarily in that order, but that's off the top of my head. And I guess like maybe one last one would probably be Hagel. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think that even if Sergachev was not in a hypothetical trade that would send him to Toronto, I just don't see a deal like that happening between Tampa and Toronto, who are just very close in in this division to each other in terms of talent. Yeah, I mean, you could look at the standings this year and say, well, Toronto was mathematically better. But I mean, if you watch this Toronto team here and there throughout the course of the year, and even in the playoffs, I didn't see really much. Even last year, I mean, even when the Lightning played against Toronto, you don't really see much of a separation in talent when you compare these two teams, especially when they're both at their best. So let me know in the comments below how you feel about that. And we'll be back tomorrow to talk about more fun stuff here on Locked On Lightning, because every day it seems like I'm starting to see more and more hypothetical situations or articles talking about the future of the Tampa Bay Lightning. And we'll obviously be here all for it, all the rumors, all of the hypotheticals, and we'll definitely be here talking about it. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.